This incredible true story will restore your faith in quiet connection, reminding you that sometimes the most profound trust arrives without a sound. It began in the loneliest corner of the Appalachian Hills, where the trees lean over narrow valleys like old confidants. November had stripped the maples bare, their leaves slick against the damp earth. A cold drizzle clung to the mountain air, the kind that seeped through wool and skin alike. Just past dusk, the valley seemed abandoned, except for the faint, rhythmic drip of water from a porch eave and the distant rush of the creek swollen with autumn rain. On the edge of this clearing, a single pair of eyes appeared, amber flecked with gold, unblinking, watching from the tree line. They hovered for a moment, then vanished like a thought you almost caught. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that settles before something changes forever. In the Appalachian forests, bobcats rarely make themselves known. They are ghosts of the underbrush, weighing 15 to 35 pounds, their spotted coats a perfect trick of shadow and leaf. Solitary by nature, a mother will defend her kittens fiercely, yet avoid human presence at all costs. For one to cross that invisible line is a story carved from instinct and desperation. The valley had been cold and wet for days, nights dipping into the 30s. Small prey were scarce. A kitten in those conditions faced a needle-thin margin between life and fading away. And that night, something unseen pressed a wild mother toward a choice no bobcat makes lightly. Before we continue, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments, and let's see how far this story reaches beyond this quiet Appalachian porch. Inside the cabin, Sam Green rubbed the stiffness from his fingers as he stoked his wood stove. The glow of the fire painted the log walls in wanted light. He'd spent most of the day splitting wood and mending the loose gate along his property line, a habit as much as a necessity. Retired from forest service, Sam had once known these hills like the lines of his own hands. Since losing his wife last winter, he'd wandered them with a different kind of knowing, the way grief maps itself onto familiar landscapes, turning every bend in the creek into a memory. Tonight, fatigue settled in his bones like the cold mist outside. He pulled the flannel collar higher around his neck and stood by the window, absently scanning the tree line the way some men check the evening news. The glass was fogged from the stove's warmth. He wiped it with his sleeve, leaving streaks. And there she was, a shadow between the bare hickories, solid yet trembling at the edges. He didn't recognize her shape immediately. She was crouched low, ears forward, tail twitching once before going still. Then the subtle curve of her shoulders caught the porch light, and instinct sharpened his vision. Bobcat. His pulse quickened, a primal thud that had nothing to do with fear. He hadn't seen a bobcat this close in years, not since the winter he and his wife tracked one in the snow for the sheer wonder of it. But something was off. Even through the mist and dark, her posture spoke of hesitation, of a calculation against risk. She stayed there for several breaths, then melted back into the forest, leaving the clearing empty and quiet. Sam's hand rested against the cool glass, and in that moment he felt the hollow of his cabin expand. The forest had brought him a whisper, and he wasn't sure why it echoed so deeply inside. Dawn came softly to the valley, carrying the kind of light that made the world feel newly whispered into being. A pale mist clung to the creek's edges, rising in tendrils that curled between the hickory trunks. The forest exhaled the scent of wet leaves and cold stone, and a distant woodpecker began its patient percussion, as if to remind the hills that life continued whether anyone was watching or not. This was the valley's before. The quiet world that existed when no human footsteps stirred, when the bobcat mother, Willow, moved like a thought across the forest floor. Her tawny coat blended seamlessly with the patchwork of brown leaves and dappled shadow. She slipped along a deer path, paws soundless against the damp earth. Her tail, short and tufted, flicked only once before stilling again. Bobcats were solitary by design. She had learned in her 3 lean years of life that survival favored invisibility. Willow's world was a collage of scent and sound. She caught the lingering musk of raccoon on a low branch, the faint acrid trace of fox along the ridgeline. Beneath it all was the metallic tang of wet stone from the creek and the rich loam smell of the forest floor. Her ears swiveled toward the faint chatter of chickadees, alert to any sudden shift that might signal danger. To her, the valley was a map of stories written in whispers. She paused by the creek, lowering her head to drink. The water was icy, reflecting the first hint of pale gold as the sun crept over the ridge. Behind her, the kitten stirred. Small and fragile, it crept from under the tangle of roots where they had sheltered, its legs trembling with effort. Its fur, mottled and soft, was darkened by last night's drizzle. Even in the fragile dawn light, Sam, if he'd been there, would have seen the difference. The mother sleek and strong, the kitten moving with a hesitancy that spoke of something wrong. A chickadee fluttered close, and Willow stiffened, her muscles coiled in silent warning. Instinct hummed through her veins. Protect, move, vanish if needed. She was a creature of stillness and sudden motion, and in this pause she radiated a kind of dignity only the wild could forge. Every muscle decision was a quiet testament to survival. In this moment, the valley belonged entirely to her. No human sigh ant drifted on the air yet, no crack of a cabin door or crunch of boots on frost. The forest hummed in low tones, the creek's murmur, the occasional plop of a falling acorn, the whisper of wind through pines. It was a place where life unfolded in delicate layers, hidden from those who moved too fast to notice. Season pressed its weight on her decisions. Late autumn in the Appalachians meant prey grew scarcer as the cold deepened. Rabbits and mice moved cautiously. A missed hunt could mean a night of hunger for both mother and kitten. Her body had thinned in recent weeks, fur clinging to muscle and sinew, shaped by miles of quiet endurance. And now, as the season's damp chill lingered, the kitten's cough, soft, almost like a hiccup, became the only sound that mattered. From his cabin uphill, Sam stirred his coffee and glanced out the window at the light creeping over the ridge. He didn't yet see Willow moving through her world, but the valley's quiet was already pressing against his loneliness, nudging at a part of him that had gone unused since grief hollowed him out. In the valley, life was delicate and patient, a series of moments that could vanish as quickly as mist in sun. And yet, beneath the quiet beauty, a silent question gathered weight. How long could a fragile life endure in the cold, waiting for a world that rarely offered mercy? The mist thinned, sunlight streaking gold across the creek, and Willow slipped back into the underbrush. This was the rhythm of the valley, the calm heartbeat before the tremor of change. Willow crouched beneath the tangle of fallen branches, her body molded to the earth as if she could become part of it. The forest's dampness clung to her fur, tiny beads of water catching the thin morning light like scattered glass. She had learned to make herself invisible, not just to the hawks overhead or the fox that sometimes prowled the edges of her territory, but to the world itself. It was how a bobcat survived. Yet invisibility weighed heavier this season, because it was not just her life she carried in silence. It was her kitten's. The tiny one lay pressed against her belly, its breathing uneven, each inhale a faint quiver through its ribs. Barely 7 weeks old, the kitten was a bundle of mottled fur with faint spots fading along its sides. Its eyes, still more blue-gray than gold, blinked slowly, heavy with exhaustion. A kitten this young should have been a burst of wild energy, pouncing on leaves, batting at shadows, but this one only stirred in small, cautious movements. Willow bent her head and licked between its ears, her rasping tongue smoothing damp fur, her amber eyes scanning the forest as she worked. Bobcats are solitary, and a mother will raise her litter alone. She will carry them from den to den, never staying more than a week in one place to keep predators guessing. Her world had narrowed to a single instinct: protect and provide. Yet in the dim light beneath the hickories, her maternal vigilance trembled against the reality of weakness she could not solve with teeth or claws. A faint cough left the kitten, more vibration than sound, and Willow froze. Even the forest seemed to pause with her. Far above, a crow called once, harsh against the muted air. She pressed her muzzle against the kitten, drawing in its scent, familiar and fragile. Her thoughts, if they could be put into words, were simple and weighty. Stay, breathe, live. The forest around her pulsed with quiet life. The musky trail of a possum curled along the base of the ridge. A squirrel chattered in alarm 2 trees over, tail flicking like a metronome. Sunlight slanted between bare branches, a pale lattice of warmth that barely reached the cold earth. Even in this private world of scent and sound, Willow's focus circled back to the tiny weight pressed to her side. She knew hunger and cold, but this helpless waiting, was a different kind of predator. Biology drove her to act in cycles she had followed since her first. At spring, hunt at dawn and dusk, avoid open spaces, groom and shelter the young, and teach them the silent ways of survival. But nature did not grant her the tools to fight sickness she could not see. Her paws could carry her to water, to prey, to cover, but they could not warm the kitten's lungs or ease its weary trembling. For a moment, she lifted her head and sniffed the wind. A faint thread of smoke drifted from the cabin uphill, curling through the chilled air. It carried the scents of wood ash and old pine, mingled with something fainter, coffee perhaps, or just the ghost of human presence. Willow's ears turned toward it, but she did not move closer. She remembered enough of humans to keep her distance. The sound of distant engines, the scent of metal, the sharpness of noise in a quiet world, and yet instinct tugged at her in ways she could not name. The kitten stirred, pawing weakly at her belly. Willow adjusted, curling her body tighter around the small life as the day's light grew stronger. A patch of warmth broke through the treetops and fell across her fur, highlighting the soft ripple of muscle and the protective curve of her form. In that golden beam, the moment seemed almost sacred, the wild's most private ritual, a mother and her young tethered by the silent agreement that life, no matter how fragile, would keep reaching for the next breath. From the porch uphill, the forest looked still to any human eye. But here, at the forest floor, a quiet bond burned bright. The valley held its breath with them, waiting for a choice neither mother nor man yet knew they would have to make. By the second week of cold mornings, the forest's stillness held a different weight, the kind of weight that made every rustle a question and every shadow a warning. Frost edged the creek stones in delicate lace, and the ground under Willow's paws bit with icy dampness. She moved, slowly along the ravine, ears twitching at every brittle snap of leaf beneath her pads, her tail held low in thought. Behind her, the kitten struggled to follow. Its legs wobbled as if the earth tilted beneath it, and each step seemed to take its last reserves. Twice it paused to cough, a soft, almost apologetic sound that would never carry far enough for help to hear. Predators in these hills hunted the weak, and weakness here was a whisper, not a cry. The signs of suffering were quiet but undeniable. The kitten's fur, once sleek with its soft kitten gloss, now stuck in faint clumps from damp nights. Its tiny chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, ribs too visible in the slant of dawn light. Even in the intimate world of the forest, where survival often meant moving on without ceremony, the kitten carried its struggle with a kind of fragile dignity. Willow paused at the base of a hemlock, scanning the forest with sharp, amber eyes. Her instincts hummed, part hunger, part worry. She knew the patterns of this valley well. Squirrels darting along hickory limbs, rabbits slipping between boulders, the rustle of mice in leaf litter. But her body language betrayed an unusual hesitation. She lingered longer in open space than she should have, as though calculating something beyond hunting. Scientifically, her behavior was a contradiction. Bobcat mothers do not seek exposure. They thrive in concealment, moving their kittens between temporary dens, hollow logs, rock crevices, abandoned fox burrows. But illness shifts those rhythms. A kitten weakened by respiratory distress is vulnerable to cold, damp, and predators. For a wild mother to hesitate, to weigh a decision so long, meant instinct was wrestling with desperation. A thin drizzle began again, threading down through skeletal branches. The forest carried that raw November smell, wet leaves and iron-rich soil. The kitten stumbled in the mud, then simply sat, sides heaving in the chilled air. Willow returned immediately, nudging it with her nose, licking its ears with a rough tenderness. Her body curved protectively around the tiny shape, heat radiating into its trembling fur. In the cabin uphill, Sam sipped his evening tea by the window. The glass was cold beneath his hand, and the rhythmic ticking of rain on the porch roof filled the silence around him. He had grown attuned to this valley's small signals over decades, but now there was a hum beneath it all, a sense that something waited just beyond his knowing. He didn't yet see the bobcat and her struggling young, but the forest seemed to carry the story toward him in a language he had forgotten he could understand. The crisis unfolded in muted tones. There were no cries, no chaos, just a quiet erosion of strength beneath the weight of rain and cold. And with each shallow breath, the invisible line between wild and human life inched closer. Even in the deepest solitude of nature, there is a moment where survival teeters against the quiet gravity of loss. For Willow, that moment approached with every faltering step her kitten took. For Sam, though he didn't yet know it, that same moment would soon knock on his life like a soft paw at the edge of his grief. Samuel Green's mornings began the same way since his wife passed the previous winter, slow, deliberate, and wrapped in the soft weight of silence. At 58, his world had narrowed to the valley, and the cabin perched on its edge, a small log structure with a tin roof that pinged under every drizzle. This morning, as frost crusted the porch railing, Sam wrapped his fingers around a chipped mug of coffee and let the warmth seep into his hands. The forest had been his companion long before grief hollowed him out. Decades as a forest ranger had trained him to read its subtle language, how the hush of birds meant a predator nearby, how a faint scuff in the dirt could tell you a deer passed hours ago. Since his retirement, he had walked these ridges daily, moving slowly enough to notice the stories most people missed. But since losing Anna, his wife of 33 years, his walks had changed. They were no longer about the forest itself, but about outrunning the heaviness in his chest, or perhaps letting it keep pace with him until it became bearable. On this morning, a streak of movement near the tree line caught his eye. At first, he thought it was nothing, just the play of wind through the thinning branches. Then he saw the prints on the edge of the clearing, small, deliberate, unmistakably feline. He crouched, knees creaking against the cold boards of the porch, and studied them with the same quiet focus he once gave to search and rescue trails. 4 toes, no claw marks. Too large for a house cat, too neat for a coyote. His heart gave a low, familiar thud. Bobcat, he murmured under his breath, the word tasting of memory. He hadn't seen one this close in years. Most people in town would never know they lived alongside ghosts of the underbrush, but Sam did. He followed the prints to where they disappeared into the forest edge, noting how the damp soil held the faint outline of a smaller set beside the first. He imagined the scene, a mother guiding her young, careful, silent. The knowledge stirred something he hadn't felt in months, a thread of quiet wonder piercing the fog of his solitude. Then another detail tightened his chest. The small tracks seemed to falter, uneven impressions sinking deeper in spots. He knew enough to recognize hesitation, weight shifting and fatigue. A memory surfaced unbidden. His wife, his hand trembling as she tried to lift a teacup in her final weeks. He drew in a slow breath, the cold air biting his lungs. That night, rain returned in thin needles. Sam sat by the fire, reading without really seeing the words. Every so often, he found his eyes drifting to the window. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something else, something harder to name. In his chest, grief and instinct tangled. He knew the rules of the wild. You do not interfere unless truly necessary. But he also knew the subtle difference between a life finding its way and a life slipping quietly toward an ending. The phone on his counter buzzed. It was his sister, checking in like she did every few weeks from 3 states away. He hesitated before answering. Their conversations were always brief and polite, punctuated by the unspoken understanding that she couldn't cross the distance his grief had carved. He ended the call after a few minutes, then went to the porch, drawn by something beyond habit. The drizzle had softened to mist, and in the lantern light he saw it again, a flicker of motion at the edge of the clearing, a shadow that didn't belong to wind or imagination. He leaned against the railing, heart pressing against his ribs, every sense reaching into the night. He couldn't explain why, but he felt as though the forest itself was watching him back. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a bobcat mother paused, amber eyes glinting in the dim light, her world narrowing to the fragile weight she carried. And though Sam didn't know it yet, 2 silent lives were about to fold into his own, stitching a new thread through the fabric of his solitude. Night settled over the valley like a slow exhale, drawing the last threads of daylight into the tree line. The cabin's lantern light spilled a small amber circle across the porch, catching the soft drizzle as it turned to glittering beads on the railing. Beyond that pool of light, the forest crouched in silence. Sam stood barefoot on the weathered boards, his coffee long gone cold, heart ticking with the subtle tension that only solitude and instinct could weave. He had been watching the tree line for nearly an hour, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. It wasn't the usual vigilance of a ranger scanning for movement. It was something quieter, almost reverent. Each shift of shadow could have been imagination, yet his gut whispered otherwise. The forest had a way of announcing presence without sound, and tonight it thrummed with a muted anticipation. Then he saw her. A shape emerged from the mist at the base of the hickories, low, deliberate, and rippling with the coiled grace of muscle under fur. Willow paused just beyond the clearing, her amber eyes reflecting a glint of porch light. Behind her, a smaller shadow stumbled, barely visible against the wet leaves. The kitten faltered, then pressed itself against her leg, sides fluttering in a shallow rhythm. Sam froze, his breath catching in his throat. Years of field experience told him to stay utterly still, to become part of the quiet. He could feel the cold through the boards under his feet, hear the drip of water from the eaves, smell the damp earth rising with the mist. And under all of that, he felt the raw, unspoken weight of this moment. The wild had arrived at his threshold. Willow's body language was a conversation. Her tail twitched once and stilled. Her ears remained upright, not flat with aggression. She took one step forward, then another, muscles tight with calculation. Her eyes flicked to the porch, a human shape standing motionless in the soft glow. Then she lowered her head and, with painstaking care, set the kitten down at the edge of the clearing. The world seemed to hold its breath. For Sam, time folded into a single pulse of awareness. He saw the slight tremor in the kitten's legs, the faint puff of its breath in the cold air, the sheen of wet fur clinging to its small body. He noticed the mother's chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm, as if she were measuring the distance between fear and hope. He didn't move, but he let his heart speak through stillness. "I see you," I mean no harm." Years of forest work had taught him that animals read intent more than motion, and intent in this moment was all he had to offer. A light wind shifted through the clearing, carrying the scents of wood smoke, wet pine, and the faint musk of bobcat. Willow sniffed the air, her whiskers twitching. She did not flee. Instead, she lingered, eyes locked to his, and the night hummed with the fragile thread of unspoken trust. Ethical tension coiled through Sam's thoughts. He knew the rules. Wild animals belong to the wild. Intervention can tip the balance in ways that echo beyond one life. Yet watching the kitten struggle to hold itself upright stirred something that reached past protocol. It wasn't just pity. It was recognition. He had seen this kind of fight before, in hospital rooms where breaths came shallow and time moved like a slow tide. Minutes passed like hours. Then, as if testing the depth of her decision, Willow nudged the kitten closer with her muzzle, leaving it just a few feet beyond the porch. She stepped back into the shadows, eyes never leaving his. It was not surrender, it was a negotiation, a silent request carved from instinct and hope. Help, but honor the wildness. Sam swallowed, throat tight, and let the night hold the weight of what had just begun. He did not step forward, not yet. Trust, he knew, was a slow bridge, and the first plank had just been set down between two worlds. The first light of dawn crept over the ridge, turning the mist into a soft river of gold. Sam sat on his porch steps, his breath curling in faint clouds. The night's stillness had not yet broken. Even the birds seemed to hold back their song. Before him, on the damp edge of the clearing, the fragile boundary between wild and human trembled in the shape of a bobcat kitten. The tiny creature swayed on its paws, fur darkened with dew. Its chest fluttered in shallow rhythms, each breath a quiet battle. A thin mewl rose, not a cry, more like a whisper the world might miss if it weren't listening. Sam leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands still, letting the soft gravity of his presence speak what words could not. "I see you. I am here." Beyond the kitten, Willow lingered in the half-light. Her amber eyes locked with his, and the forest seemed to vanish around that gaze. No wind, no creak, no chill existed for that suspended moment. Only the silent exchange between a grieving man and a desperate mother. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, her body taut with instinct, but her paws rooted in trust. It was a language older than words. Sam's chest tightened, and he felt the same ache that had haunted him through every empty evening since Anna's passing. The kitten's trembling felt like a mirror of his own heart, the way it had quivered under the weight of absence. He knew, without a doubt, that this moment was not random. The wild does not ask often, but today it had asked him. The kitten coughed, a tiny shiver running through its frame. Willow shifted, her body low but unflinching, as if granting permission while bracing against instinct. Sam moved for the first time, inching his hand toward the ground, palm down, not reaching for the kitten but letting his presence settle in the space between fear and safety. From his years in the field, he knew bobcats rarely allow this clot. Oseness. A mother will abandon a den at the faintest whiff of threat. Yet here she stayed, the slow rhythm of her tail speaking a truth louder than sound. "I am trusting you." The world seemed to breathe with him as he leaned forward just enough to study the kitten's face. Its small nose twitched, catching the faint scent of wood smoke and human skin. For the first time, its gaze lifted, meeting his. Blue-gray eyes met weathered brown, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of fragility, of shared survival, of the quiet will to keep going. Sam's throat burned. He thought of the long winter nights after Anna's funeral, when the cabin felt like an echo chamber for grief. He thought of the way he'd avoided mirrors, how he had turned from neighbors' sympathy, shrinking from the world as if fading would hurt less than being seen. And now, here in this misty clearing, a creature of the wild had chosen to see him. The sun crested the ridge, breaking the scene with a shaft of light that touched the kitten's back. Its fur glistened, trembling with life and dew. Willow blinked once more, then stepped back into the underbrush, her outline dissolving into the forest. She had left her heart in his care, and Sam understood the vow he had just accepted. In the silence that followed, he whispered, "All right, I've got you." If you've ever shared a moment of wordless understanding with an animal, subscribe now to join others who believe connection can transcend words. Tell me in the comments, what's your most unforgettable encounter with wildlife? The valley woke under a thin veil of frost, each blade of grass shining like glass in the new light. Sam sat on the porch steps, the kitten no more than a shivering bundle against the edge of the boards. Willow lingered at the tree line, a silent sentinel, her amber eyes never leaving his hands. Sam's breath misted in the cold air as he weighed the unspoken question. He had spent his career respecting the wild's rules. Do not interfere unless the balance is tipped beyond repair. But here was a life smaller than two hands, its chest rising in shallow, uncertain rhythm, and a mother who had already made the impossible choice to ask for help. He rubbed his thumb over the edge of the wool blanket draped across his knees, the one his wife Anna had knitted during the winter before her illness worsened. The memory stung, and with it came the echo of her voice. "Sometimes, Sam, the smallest lives need us most, even if it costs us something." The cost weighed on him now. Intervention meant risk. If he took the kitten, the mother could see it as a betrayal. If he left it, the cold and sickness would finish what hunger and rain had begun. He thought about the wildlife codes he used to teach. Wild animals belong to the wild. But he also remembered the unspoken part, the one you only understood after decades in the field. Sometimes compassion is the only law that matters. The drizzle from the night before had left the porch slick, and when Sam leaned forward, his hand brushed a bead of water from the railing. The cold snapped him into the moment. He could see the kitten's tiny sides quivering, fur matted along its flanks. A soft, almost inaudible rasp escaped its throat as it struggled for another breath. He whispered, "All right, little one, we're doing this." From the corner of his eye, Willow tensed but did not move. Her tail flicked once, then stilled. Sam moved slowly, letting the wool blanket fall across his hand as he extended it toward the kitten. He didn't scoop it up right away. He let his palm hover, offering warmth and scent first. The kitten, too weak to resist, sagged into the soft fabric. Its tiny weight pressed against his hand, a tremor of life barely anchor. "Ed to this world." Sam's heart kicked hard in his chest. He'd held fawns, injured hawks, even a black bear cub once during a sanctioned rescue. But this moment felt different. This was not protocol or duty. This was trust, fragile and personal, given to him by a mother who now blinked once from the shadows, slow and deliberate. Carrying the kitten inside felt like crossing an invisible line. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke, and the sudden warmth made the tiny creature stir with a faint twitch of its ear. Sam laid it on the old blanket near the stove, watching steam rise from its damp fur as heat began to reach its bones. He fetched a small box, lined it with a towel, and placed the kitten gently inside. As he worked, the weight of choice pressed against his ribs. If the kitten survived, he would have to navigate the delicate dance of care and release, of saving without taking. If it didn't, he wasn't sure he could carry that grief twice in one lifetime. A soft scrape against the porch pulled his attention. Through the window, Willow's silhouette hovered at the edge of light, her form rigid but present. She hadn't left. She was watching, waiting, and somehow Sam understood she was not angry. She was trusting him to finish what she could not. He crouched by the stove, resting a hand on the edge of the box, and felt a strange quiet settle over him. Decision had become action, and action had become a vow. The drive to the wildlife clinic was only 12 miles, but it felt like a journey through two worlds, one of asphalt and headlights, and one of mist and pine needles still clinging to his boots. Sam kept the truck cab quiet, the hum of the heater the only sound. Beside him on the passenger seat, the small box trembled faintly as the kitten stirred, a rasping breath punctuating the hush. He drove slowly over the winding mountain road, hands tight on the wheel, as though, speed alone might shatter the fragile life he carried. The wildlife clinic sat on the edge of the county's only town, a converted farmhouse with a simple green sign, Appalachian Wildlife Care. The gravel popped under his tires as he pulled in. Lights glowed warm against the gray morning, a beacon of human refuge against the indifference of November. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mingled with pine shavings and faint animal musk. A bell jingled as he stepped in, the box cradled in both hands. The receptionist glanced up, then her expression shifted when she saw the damp ball of fur shivering inside. "Bobcat kitten?" she whispered, almost reverent. Sam nodded. "Mother's still out there. Brought it to my porch. It's weak. Breathing's off." Within minutes, a wildlife vet named Dr. Ellen Harris appeared, her brown hair pulled back, glasses fogged from rushing in from the back room. She lifted the kitten with gloved hands, her touch efficient but gentle. The kitten gave a soft, protesting squeak, its blue-gray eyes barely open. "Respiratory infection," she murmured. "Common this time of year if the den gets damp. Lungs are struggling, but it's not too far gone. Antibiotics and warmth. We'll monitor hydration. You did the right thing bringing it in." Sam exhaled slowly, a tension leaving his chest he hadn't known he was holding, but the relief was tangled with something heavier. He thought of Willow, waiting in the forest with only instinct to keep her tethered to hope. "I can keep it here," Dr. Harris said, "but given the mother's involvement, returning it as soon as it's stable will be important. She'll wait, but not forever. Wild mothers rarely do." Sam nodded. He knew. He had felt that truth in the weight of her stare on his porch. Hours passed in the soft rhythm of care. A heat lamp bathed the kitten in gentle warmth, turning its fur into a halo of damp spikes. Sam watched from a corner chair as Dr. Harris administered tiny doses of medication and subcutaneous fluids. Each faint twitch of the kitten's ears felt like a victory. Each shallow breath that didn't falter was a promise. The clinic was quiet except for the distant shuffle of other patients, a barred owl with a wing wrap, a squirrel in a recovery cage. Through the window, the world was dim with steady drizzle. Sam's reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, but softer somehow. He realized he hadn't felt this particular kind of alertness in years, the way care sharpened every sense. By late afternoon, the kitten's breathing evened slightly. Dr. Harris explained the plan. One night under supervision, then careful reintroduction to its mother if progress held. Sam listened, nodding, already imagining the steps like a bridge between two hearts, his and Willow's. Driving back to the cabin, the mist had thickened into a curtain. He parked and sat in the truck for a long moment, listening to the rain whisper on the roof. Out in the tree line, he felt her presence more than he saw it. A flash of amber eyes confirmed what he already knew. She hadn't left. "I've got her," he murmured into the night, voice low, meant as much for himself as for the watching shadow. "She's in good hands, yours and mine." The forest gave no reply, only the soft drip of rain and the faint rustle of wind through skeletal hickories. But Sam felt a thread pull taut across that silent space, binding him to the wild in a way he hadn't thought possible. Winter settled in with a quiet determination, wrapping the Appalachian Valley in thin sheets of frost each morning. The creek along Sam's property slowed to a whisper beneath ice-crusted edges, and the air smelled of cold stone and pine. Inside the cabin, a small island of warmth pulsed from the wood stove, where the kitten, no longer a trembling ball of damp fur but not yet strong, dozed in a towel-lined bows. Each soft exhale puffed a faint fog in the cool room, a fragile rhythm that Sam now measured his days by. The first week after the intervention was a pendulum of hope and fear. Dr. Harris had allowed Sam to bring the kitten home after its lungs stabilized under antibiotics and warmth, with strict instructions to keep handling minimal. He followed every guideline as though the forest itself were grading him. Mornings began with a check of temperature and breathing, a dropper of formula laced with medication, and a slow stroke down the kitten's spine to stimulate circulation. The tiny body would twitch in response, life sparking under his fingertips like a quiet ember. Outside, Willow kept her vigil. Most evenings, just past sunset, Sam would spot her at the edge of the clearing, a shadow sculpted in frost and moonlight. Her posture remained taut, tail twitching once, then still. He began leaving faint traces of the kitten's scent, small towels and bits of bedding, on the porch so she would know her young still lived. Sometimes he thought he saw her chest rise and fall in a slow, deliberate way, as if exhaling tension she had carried since the first cough in their den. Recovery was not a straight line. On the third night, the kitten wheezed harder than usual, and Sam sat by the stove well past midnight, listening to its shallow breaths. Memories pressed in, hospital monitors, Anna's hand limp against his, the helplessness of waiting. He whispered to the kitten, like he had to his wife in those quiet hours, "Stay with me. You're stronger than this." The cabin felt like a sanctuary suspended between worlds, the place where life either slipped away or stubbornly clung to the next dawn. By the second week, small victories began to bloom. The kitten's fur regained its soft sheen. Its ears twitched at the crackle of the fire and the whistle of the kettle. One afternoon, as sunlight stretched across the floorboards, it batted weakly at a fallen pine needle Sam had tracked in on his bow. "Oh, out." That single paw swipe sent a surprising surge of joy through his chest. He laughed, low and rough from disuse, startling even himself. Scientific knowledge threaded naturally through his care. He knew bobcat kittens relied on mothers for up to 10 months, learning to stalk and pounce through play. This one's instincts were intact. He could see it in the way its eyes tracked every flicker of movement, but its body needed time to catch up. He added a small climbing branch in the box to encourage stretching. Within days, the kitten hooked a paw over it, a clumsy first claim to its birthright. All the while, the rhythm of the valley mirrored the rhythm of healing. Icicles grew and fell from the porch eaves. The morning frost thickened into silver carpets that crunched under Sam's boots. Each time he stepped outside, he felt the forest watching. One night, he left the porch light off and simply stood in the dark. After a long pause, Willow appeared at the clearing's edge, her amber eyes catching faint moonlight. They held each other's gaze for a long while. No fear now, only a mutual understanding that this fragile life was a shared responsibility. By the fourth week, the kitten could stand without wobbling. It clambered from the towel box to the hearthrug, sniffing the air, its body stronger, breathing deeper. Sam felt the shift inside himself too, grief softening into purpose, the ache of loss tempered by the quiet thrill of watching life choose to stay. He knelt by the box one evening, hand resting lightly on the edge, and whispered, "Almost there, little one. Soon you'll be where you belong." By early spring, the valley stirred with quiet rebirth. Snowmelt trickled down the slopes, and the creek sang louder each day, carrying the scent of wet stone and new life. Green shoots pierced the leaf litter, and the air shifted from metallic cold to the soft, earthy warmth of thawing soil. Inside the cabin, Sam knelt by the open door, watching a small spotted figure crouched on the porch, a kitten no longer frail, its fur sleek and shining under the pale morning sun. The change in the little bobcat was undeniable. Its steps were sure now, muscles flexing with a strength that had once seemed impossible. Where once there had been shallow breaths and trembling paws, there was now the deliberate stillness of a predator testing its birthright. It sniffed the spring air, ears twitching at the distant chatter of a red squirrel. Sam watched, heart swelling with a complicated mix of pride and impending loss. Willow emerged from the tree line like a secret the forest decided to share again. Her amber eyes locked on Sam for a heartbeat before sliding to the kitten, and in that silent exchange, he understood. This was the moment he had been both longing for and dreading. He opened the porch door fully, letting the scents of pine, thawed earth, and freedom flow inside. The kitten hesitated, then padded down the steps. Its small paws pressed into the soft mud, leaving perfect imprints that would vanish with the next rain. Willow waited, tail twitching once before going still. Sam could almost feel the pulse of connection vibrating across the clearing. For a few suspended seconds, the world contracted to this single scene: a man on a weathered porch, a wild mother reclaiming her young, and the fragile bridge between grief and healing that had carried all three of them through the winter. His chest ached with the bittersweet weight of it. He realized that in saving the kitten, he had also saved a quiet piece of himself, the part that still believed in trust, in love without words, in the power of simply being present. The kitten reached its mother, pressing against her leg before she bent to groom its ear with one swift lick. Willow looked up once more, and this time Sam felt the message land in his bones: acknowledgement, gratitude, and goodbye. He swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes, and whispered, "Take care of each other." And that moment, he understood that transformation wasn't loud or triumphant. It was the quiet reshaping of a soul that had been bent by loss and straightened by love freely given. He felt lighter, though the valley itself had not changed. The creek still ran, the wind still carried the scent of pine and damp soil, and the cabin still stood in the same solitude, but he was no longer alone in it. The Bobcat pair slipped into the trees, their forms dissolving into shadow and light. Sam stayed on the porch long after they vanished, listening to the rustle of branches, the drumming of a distant woodpecker, and the steady beat of his own heart. If this quiet rescue reminded you that hope can arrive in silence, subscribe now to join our circle of nature storytellers. Tell me in the comments, who would you trust with your most fragile hope? Spring deepened in the Appalachian Valley, softening the edges of winter into green and gold. The creek ran clear and insistent, swollen with snowmelt and April rains. Dogwood petals drifted on the breeze like shy confetti, catching in the moss along the cabin's porch steps. Sam leaned against the railing one morning, mug warming his hands, the air alive with the scent of damp soil and wildflowers just starting to bloom. Weeks had passed since Willow reclaimed her kitten. Life in the cabin had returned to its old rhythms: splitting wood, tending the stove, long walks along the ridges. But something essential had shifted inside him. The silence was no longer heavy. It hummed with possibility, as if the forest itself had stitched a thin thread of connection between him and everything living beyond his walls. He hadn't expected to see them again. Wild creatures rarely revisit the chapters they leave behind, but on a soft morning thick with mist, he caught the glint of amber eyes at the edge of the clearing. Willow stood poised among the hickories, her coat sleek in the rising light. At her side, the kitten, longer-legged now, spots beginning to fade into the muted gold of adolescence, paused, gazing toward the cabin with a stillness that felt like memory. Sam didn't move. He knew better than to break the quiet ritual. The mother's tail flicked once, and the young one mirrored her posture perfectly, alert, proud, and undeniably alive. It lasted only seconds, that wild tableau framed in mist and dogwood petals, but it felt eternal. Then Willow turned, silent as shadow, and her young followed, disappearing into the underbrush with the confidence of creatures that belonged entirely to the world beyond his reach. The porch felt different after they vanished. Emptier, yes, but also luminous with meaning. Sam breathed in the valley's air, cool and laced with the scent of pine needles warming under sun. He thought of the winter nights spent listening to shallow, uncertain breaths, of the silent moments of trust that had passed like a heartbeat between him and a wild mother. He thought of the way healing had crept into his life without fanfare, carried on soft paws, and the quiet insistence of life choosing to endure. He understood now that love didn't need to be loud to be real. That presence, simply being there, bearing witness to another life, was its own form of salvation. His wife had once told him that the forest was full of mirrors if you knew where to look. That winter, a pair of amber eyes had shown him his own reflection. A man not beyond repair, a heart still capable of answering when the world whispered for help. A soft wind moved through the valley, rippling the new leaves. Somewhere downstream, the creek caught the sun and flared like liquid gold. Sam lifted his mug in a quiet salute to the tree line, a gesture no one but the forest could see. In the days that followed, he began to notice more than he had in years, the pattern of a hawk tracing lazy spirals above the ridge, the way early violets pushed through last year's decay, the music of frogs tuning the night air. Life had always been here, waiting for him to look up. Some stories end with doors closing or roads vanishing, but this one ended like spring, soft, inevitable, and full of return. Somewhere out there, a bobcat mother and her young moved through the underbrush, leaving paw prints in mud and memory alike. And here, on a weathered porch above a singing creek, a man carried the quiet weight of their trust, like a blessing. He would never set down,